Hey, how are you, Dr. Sajjadi? Thanks for coming to this session. We would like you to a little bit introduce yourself about the work that we are doing in the Sajjadi's lab, and we can a little bit have introduction about it, and then we can move on.
Of course. Thank you for having me. So my name is Ahmad Sajjadi. I am a neurologist by training, also have a PhD in neurosciences. I am dedicated to studies of degenerative brain diseases, those that cause dementia, of course, through different modalities, including brain imaging, speech analysis, that we will talk more about, analysis of blood markers, and eventually looking at the pathologies on the brain. We try to study the contribution of different types of degenerative pathologies to cognitive impairment and eventually dementia in older individuals.
Oh, nice. And then I can see that there is some challenges in diagnosis of Alzheimer's. I mean, I see that some of those factors are not going to be diagnosed even after the person is passing away, and early detection is a challenge. Does your lab do something about it?
Yeah, I mean, so the complexity is multifold in the sense that there are more than one conditions that cause what looks like Alzheimer's disease and eventually dementia in older people. And the challenge is a lot of them actually look alike clinically. So it's really difficult to predict who has what during life for that reason. And then, as you mentioned, things start really slowly in the degenerative diseases, and therefore it's difficult to kind of pinpoint problems in the earliest stages. Of course, when things develop and advance, it's easy to see somebody has cognitive problems that are significant. But in those early stages, that are really important to recognize because of the fact that treatments work the best at those mild stages. It's tough. It's tough to diagnose cognitive impairment, and also it's really more difficult even to know what is exactly causing the cognitive impairment. So in our lab, what we do, we looked at different kind of modalities, and you look at utility of these different modalities, both for detection of early stages of cognitive impairment, and also potentially more importantly even to predict what is causing that cognitive impairment in individuals who are suffering.
Do you have any, let's say, prediction outcomes right now that what is the real cause of those Alzheimer's disease and related
I think we are actually pretty good in some of those conditions. Like with Alzheimer's disease, of course, we have development of diagnostic tests that are pretty good at this point, and there are different kinds of options as well. There is imaging with PET scans, there is blood tests these days that are FDA approved, and other modalities are up and coming. The problem arises when you are looking at possibility of presence of these other pathologies. Some have some tests that are in development, and some don't even have a test at this point.
And do we have any kind of, let's say, upcoming technologies that we could use or develop for that kind of prediction, which you mentioned that some of them, we don't have any tests for it. We can just guesstimate. So what is your opinion about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think we do have promising ways to make a diagnosis of these conditions, especially in the coming years, I would say. So examples include using brain imaging, both MRI and PET scans that are sort of more specific for some of these conditions, to look at different kinds of signatures that indicate that somebody might have a particular pathology. So that's one. Then we have the blood tests that, again, for Alzheimer's disease, we have good blood tests even at this point. But for some of those other pathologies, we are developing some blood tests and sometimes spinal fluid tests, actually, to make a diagnosis of these conditions. And then where your expertise, for example, lies with speech analysis. So the idea is by using accessible and not costly kind of measures to get a window to the performance of cognition in individuals, we can not only detect cognitive impairment, but hopefully also identify signatures that are specific to certain pathologies.
And also, you talked about the speech. And what patterns or, let's say, features do you think that is more appropriate for detection or usable? I mean, most of the people doesn't know about how they can use their speech patterns for cognitive impairment detection.
Yeah. First of all, it depends what kind of question we are trying to answer. Like if you're looking for development of early stages of cognitive impairment, there are different markers that we look for as opposed to, say, for example, detection of particular pathologies that might have other particular measures. So when it comes to actual cognitive impairment itself, things such as slowness of talking, so reduced speech rate, for example, hesitation, meaning not thinking of words that one wants to say and has to sort of fish out for those words, and then hesitation markers that are the fillers that people use to kind of fill the gaps and fill the silence when they are groping for those words. So those are the kind of markers that are well known in the field as markers of cognitive impairment. And when it comes to particular pathologies, then we are looking at things such as proportion of content words versus closed class words and other kind of measures that are more nuanced than the actual speech rate and things like that.
While we are talking about speech, I know that you are doing so much in neuroimaging parts as well. But for a speech part, do you think that for using, even combining it with other modalities, do you think that how could we early detect it? Like, I know that some of those participants are too old. Could we, let's say, do the detection long time before going into 80s or 90s?
Well, I mean, the idea is that with all of these kind of tests, and the same applies to neuropsychological tests that are used traditionally, you try to compare the participants or the patients to somebody with their sort of background, age-wise, sex-wise, education-wise. And by doing that, basically, you are highly or more highly likely to identify the patterns that are indicating subtle deficits. Now, in many cases, we think those subtle deficits start years before somebody develops florid cognitive impairment, and we have done some work to suggest that. So yes, I do think that by analysis of a speech, there is a chance to detect these subtle problems even years before somebody develops cognitive impairment and dementia.
And for the, I was in some conferences and seminars that they are talking about some factors, like risk factors or those that could be the cause of that cognitive impairment development. What do you think about, like, a stress, lifestyle, something like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, there are some kind of identified risk factors. I would say sedentary lifestyle, lack of exercise, unhealthy diet, those things that we all know kind of are not good for our heart, are potentially not good for our brains. Though most of those, however, basically lead to conditions that affect the vessels of the brain, so causing to what we refer to as vascular cognitive impairment. So yes, I mean, those lifestyle matters are important for development of vascular problems. In case of Alzheimer's, in case of the specific neuropathologies, we are not entirely sure actually what causes that. I mean, we do have some evidence to suggest that, for example, not controlling somebody's blood pressure with blood pressure medications in middle age might be a risk factor for things such as Alzheimer's disease itself and some of these other degenerative pathologies. But those kinds of data need to be replicated for us to be confident about them.
And also, I know that you are eager about applying AI applications for the detection part. What do you think that AI world could do for that kind of detection or prediction part?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, we are very interested in that area. I think the promise of AI lies in its ability to deal with big sources of data. So one of the things we have to deal with in dementia or in cognitive impairment or in cognition in general is how multifaceted it is. So I think what AI and sort of these deep learning methods allow us to do is to find those patterns that are otherwise difficult to distinguish. Not only that, but also in terms of making those data accessible. Like an example from the speech, as you know, and are well familiar with, it takes a lot of work to basically transcribe speech samples and sort of analyze them both from an acoustic standpoint and also from a linguistic standpoint. So if somebody had to do that sort of manually, each sample from each patient or participant takes hours. But using AI, I mean, we might sort of sacrifice the precision to a sort of degree, but what you gain in terms of efficiency, I think, offset that. And that's the value of AI. So making these things even practical in terms of thinking about them as diagnostic strategies.
So the most important part besides the application of it is the trust and reliability. Do you think that we could reach to the point that digital biomarkers could be replaced by those let's say time-consuming or CSF biomarker stuff that we are already using? Do you think that is like an application of doing it, or do you think that is like a part of assistant tool to that?
I think it can come in both ways. Right now, I would consider these kinds of technologies as sort of screening measures in some ways. And of course, we can tweak the parameters in the sense that they are more sensitive, so we don't sort of lose people, but we have a kind of lower threshold to allow everybody and anybody who we think might have a problem in, and then basically apply the second round of assessments. As time goes by, as our confidence in these techniques kind of grows, and as the data are replicated by different kind of studies, then potentially there might come a day that they can be a standalone sort of strategy to make a diagnosis of some of these conditions.
And also, let's talk about a little bit about the future and the grants that you have. And I am going to congratulate you for the recent one that you got, one of the big ones. And I just do like you to a little bit explain more about it, and to just give us a little bit information about how that could shape the future of the lab.
Sure. So right now, a lot of our energy is focused on a condition called LATE. It's a sort of acronym for limbic predominant age-related TDP-43 encephalopathy. It's a condition that looks like Alzheimer's disease, but it is not. It's different in terms of pathology that is underlying it than Alzheimer's disease. So this is characterized by accumulation of a protein called TDP-43. And increasingly, it is recognized as a big contributor to dementia, especially in late life. So the recent endeavors in our lab has been kind of focused on sort of increasing our understanding and ability to detect this pathology during life by doing different kinds of assessments, including the ones that we talked about. We were successful in sort of securing a recent grant, which is large, as you mentioned. It's a total of $18 million over 5 years across different sites, in order to allow us to discover sort of promising biomarkers, and also to validate some of the current recommendations for diagnosis of this condition during life. So as you mentioned, it is a big endeavor, and it requires our collaboration with multiple sites across the country to make that happen. So in answer your question in terms of how it is kind of changing or dictating potentially the focus of the lab, I wouldn't say it is changing our focus. Our focus has been this for a number of years, but it allows us and provides us with resources that will enable doing what we have wanted to do for these many years. So it's a welcome opportunity to deliver on what we have set out to do some years ago.
Nice. And while we are going to wrap it up, do you have any last word to share with us?
Yeah, and I mean, I think we have to keep an open mind in this new era of degenerative brain conditions and the research. Up until recently, the focus has been on Alzheimer's disease, and it is a justified focus, by the way, because Alzheimer's is the commonest cause of dementia. But now that we are getting to a good place in terms of diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, and even having some treatments that are FDA approved at this point that will slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease, it is time to sort of shift our focus to a certain degree to these other very important causes of dementia, including late and other ones that basically other labs and other groups are studying. So what we refer to as Alzheimer's disease-related disorders, or ADRD. So that's what the future, I think, will allow us to do, and the resources that are becoming available will allow us to do.
Thank you very much for your information, and wish you luck in your upcoming projects. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.